All right, well, it is time to start now, I suppose. It's nice to see some new faces. I guess I can try and talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the class, and then today we're going to spend most of our time talking about relativism. So overall for the course, it's kind of called or talking about loving God's world. And so there's been a big focus on trying to help us better understand God's world. What all that includes, what it's made out of, and how we understand it and how we should think about it. And so the first part of the course was really just a lot about how we learn things and about the importance of learning and how that really is kind of connected to us knowing and loving God's world. There's an interesting connection between knowing and loving. As you get to know somebody, if they're good, you love them more and more. And if you love somebody, what is it that you want to do? You want to know them more and more, right? So there's a nice connection there. So part of what we've been doing in terms of loving God's world is just trying to understand it so that we can think about it better. And a couple weeks ago, we talked about science and kind of the natural world. And then the last class period, we talked about the humanities, these areas that focus on things like human culture, values, philosophy, religion, literature, this very big, broad kind of field. And one of the things that I had mentioned in that is that the older view of the humanities is that when we study and we learn about the humanities, when we read good literature, when we do history, we learn about ourselves. And the idea is that as we learn about ourselves, we learn who we are and what we should be like. And so the humanities are meant to be transformative. They're meant to help us to engage with reality, to better know ourselves and our neighbors, and to become better people. But what I want to talk about today is kind of an objection to that. And that is like that whole view that like there's a better way of being assumes that there's a right and there's a wrong, right? That some ways are not as good as other ways. And there's a lot of pushback against that. And so that's going to be the thing that we talk about today. So just like in the sciences, after talking about the sciences, we kind of talk about a major misunderstanding of science. But it's like the only game in town, or it's the only way to have knowledge. And we talked a little bit about the relationship between science and religion. This is kind of like a problem with the humanities, and that is relativism. So hopefully that's a little bit of context. That's what we're aiming to do today. I'll pray, and then we'll get started. Dear Lord, I just thank you for this opportunity that we all have to this morning to get together and to meet with each other and to meet with you. Lord, we just pray that you would meet with us, that you would speak to us, Lord, that you would lead us and guide us into truth. Lord, that as we grow in our ability to see things clearly and to think rightly, that you would help us to love you and to love your world more. And Lord, I just I thank you for everybody that has come here. And just pray that you would bless them. And Lord, I ask that you would help me, that you would help me to be clear and concise and to cover the things that we need to. And that's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. I just realized I got to get back to where I can see my PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. All right, so the humanities and relativism. So this is going to be a little recap of what I just said. Right, so the humanities, they help us to get to better know ourselves and to become the right kind of people. But the question is there a right kind of person? And we say, that's the wrong kind of person. That's the right kind of person. And instantly you can maybe imagine saying, oh, I wouldn't even want to tell that to somebody. I wouldn't even want to say, you're the wrong kind of person. You shouldn't be that way. Right? And so the dominant view of morality, of goodness, of human nature within the humanities is that all of these things, morality, goodness, human nature, they're just relative. Right? And what that term means, we're going to talk about. That's actually what the next slide is on. And really, this is what lies behind all aspects of inclusivity. So if you think about it, like inclusiveness is a huge part of our culture now. There's lots of talks about inclusiveness. And really, what it kind of hinges off of is this idea that we shouldn't exclude anybody who disagrees with us, right? We shouldn't exclude or say that somebody is wrong about something, right? Like, should we say blue is the best color? And anybody who disagrees with it, they're wrong and they're booted out. If blue isn't your favorite color, this is not the Sunday school class for you. You leave, you get out of here. I remember as a kid one time, somebody came up and said, what's the best color? And I was like, you mean what's my favorite color? And he was like, no, what's the best color? And I was like, well, I like blue. And he was like, wrong. My favorite color is green. My mom's favorite color is green. My dad's favorite color is green. Green's the best color. Like, oh, okay. And right, but you could see like, well, that's kind of silly, right? You know, there's no right or wrong answer to that. We shouldn't, you know, say that somebody's wrong. We shouldn't say somebody's bad. We shouldn't reject somebody just because their favorite color is blue or green or whatever, right? You could maybe imagine, is Lord of the Rings the only trilogy worth watching, right? Is it the only one? Again, like, it doesn't seem like it would be right to say, you're wrong, you're a bad person if you think, you know, that it's not the greatest trilogy ever. It's the only one worth watching. If you like some other trilogy, you're just a terrible person, right? What about, like, is sex only for a monogamous heterosexual married couple? Right? So you want to say, well, you're wrong. You're bad. You see, it wants to lump that in with all of these other things. There is no single way to be. You can sleep with who you want to sleep with. You can have any sort of relationship that you want to have, right? There is no right or wrong answer to these things. That's really what relativism is about. So let's try and talk a little more clearly and carefully about relativism. So the first thing that we need to know is we need to know what the word means. What is a relative statement here? So I want to kind of compare what we might call an absolute statement and a relative statement. I wish Tim was here for this one. Right, so let's consider the statement, Michael is a lumberjack. Right, if Michael is currently sleeping, like let's say that Michael's actual profession is a lumberjack. He goes out in the woods, he cuts down trees, he wears suspenders, other things. And right, but let's say Michael isn't doing any of those things currently. He's currently sleeping. Is Michael a lumberjack? Yes. All right. What if he's surrounded by a whole bunch of bankers? Is Michael a lumberjack? Yeah. Yes. What if he's like currently out to lunch or he's on vacation in Hawaii or something? Is Michael a lumberjack? Yes. Right? That statement, it's true or false, regardless of where Michael is, or regardless of what he's currently doing or who he's around. Right? That's just kind of like an absolute statement. The context does not make it true. Either he's a lumberjack, and he's a lumberjack if he's sleeping, and he's a lumberjack if he's having breakfast or whatever, eating pancakes, whatever it is that he's doing, or he's not a lumberjack, and it's false, regardless of what he's doing. But consider this statement. Michael is tall. Let's say Michael's, I don't know, we'll say 6 foot. Is Michael tall? Well, kind of depends. Compared to what? Where is Michael? What's his context? Let's say he's with a whole bunch of NBA players. Is Michael tall compared to an NBA player? No, right? Like, I think it used to be like 6'6" or 6'7" or something like that was the average height. Does that sound about right?
Probably about right.
Yeah, for an NBA player. Well, he's certainly not tall for that. What about compared to the trees that he's maybe cutting down? Is Michael tall compared to them?
No.
No. What about if he went to the Philippines? For a long time, I think it's still true, the Philippines had the shortest average height. It was like 5'3" or 5'4" was like the average height for an adult male in the Philippines. Is Michael tall? Yes. Okay. You see, like, where he is, what he's doing, his context determines whether this is true or not. There is no like sort of absolute value to it. We have to ask the question, well, tall compared to what? Tall isn't just some absolute fixed term. You know, it's not like anything over 10 inches is tall or anything over 10 feet is tall. It doesn't work that way, right? It's relative. What are we talking about? Are we talking about trees? Are we talking about people? Are we talking about NBA players? Are we talking about people in the Philippines? Right? We have to look at the context. Context is needed not just for us to know whether the statement is true or false, but the context actually makes the statement true or false. The other way that you could maybe think about it is like your position, whether you're to the left or to the right of somebody, right? So those things change based off of your context. If you guys move around, those truth values change. If I move around, those truth values change. We've been teaching Verity her left and her right. And so I would have AJ help me, and I'd have AJ stand on one side of me, and I'd say, who's on the right or who's on the left? And a couple of times, Verity would like be looking at us, and then she would have to think. And so this is what she would do. She would turn around, and then she would figure it out. And then she would get the wrong answer. And she'd get the wrong answer because she had the right hand. But what happened when she turned, right? All of a sudden it changed, you know? And so we had to like work on that a little bit, right? So left and right, it varies on context. Right now, you know, Abby's to the left, Dave is to the right. But if I go and stand behind them, it's the opposite, right? There is no sort of fixed value, okay? So this is what we're talking about here with absolute and relative statements. And really what relativism is doing is saying issues of morality are like this. They're not like this. Is it right or wrong to sleep with somebody you're not married to? Well, it depends on the context, right? Is it right or wrong to dress this way? Well, it depends on the context. Is it right or wrong to treat somebody this way? Well, it depends on the context, right? There is no absolute answer. And so what is the relevant context? Well, generally speaking, what most, like some people call this cultural relativism, but they'll say is that the culture, that's our relative context, right? Whatever a culture believes determines whether something is right or wrong. So again, it denies that there's moral absolutes and it puts all of moral issues in that lower category, right? What's the context? The culture. What's your culture say? That it's okay to do this? Then it's okay. If your culture say it's not okay to do it, then it's not okay, right? That's the context that we have to look at is culture. And we should maybe talk about like, well, why is it that people hold to this position? You know, kind of what are the arguments here? Again, the primary one is those aspects of inclusivity, is to provide a foundation for tolerance, right? So in this case, guess what? Nobody's right, nobody's wrong, right? Does anybody like saying you're wrong about something to someone else? That doesn't seem very nice. Does anybody like being told that you're wrong? You know, probably not so much, right? And so there's a lot of concern about providing tolerance for people. And we should point out, you know, like intolerance has been a major problem in human history, right? People have said, oh, you're this color, but you're not really a person, right? Oh, you're not from my tribe, you're not from my culture, you don't agree with me politically, well, you're out, you're wrong, you're bad, you're valueless, you don't have meaning, you don't have importance, or at least not as much as me, not as much as my group, not as much as my people, right? Sorry for all the people on the right. Wait, that's our group. You guys are the other group, right? And so people recognize, you know, that's really not good. It's not. That's not right. That's wrong. We shouldn't treat people that way. And people, regardless of what their cultural status is, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their height or their skin color or their weight, they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And so one way of doing it is saying, well, you can't put anybody in the bad group. You can't put anybody in the bad group. Because there is no bad group, right? That's how we do it, right? And that way everybody's valued, everybody's respected, everybody's important. right? That's one of the primary motivations for relativism. When I've had conversations with people that have held to this, that has always been the dominant driving force. That's why they hold to this, right? But there's additional arguments that have given for it. One of them is called the diversity thesis. The diversity thesis is just basically a fancy way of saying moral beliefs vary according to culture. This is a lady, her name is Ruth Benedict. She was a kind of cultural social anthropologist. She went around and looked at a bunch of different cultures. And in her work, she focused on how, like, you guys think like all cultures agree on certain things. She's like, they don't. Every culture disagrees on stuff. She was like, takes like sharing, for example. You would think every culture agrees that sharing is right. And she's like, they don't. They don't all agree about that. And there was a group of people in Papua New Guinea called the Dabuans. And she went and she studied them, and they thought sharing was wrong. You should never share something. If I have a shovel and you need a shovel, I should not share my shovel with you. That would be an immoral thing for me to do. I should not do that. And she was like, see, you think everybody agrees sharing is right or wrong, but it's not true. Moral beliefs vary drastically and radically across different cultures. And she mentioned a group of Native Americans called the Quackyoodles. And she was like, you think murder is wrong. But guess what? They said it was perfectly okay for you to randomly go up to a person and be like, hello, and kill them, right? Nothing wrong with that. No punishment for you. Nothing bad. She was like, see, you think everybody says murder is wrong? Not everybody says that. See, the Quackyoodles, they didn't hold to that. Moral beliefs vary across cultures. And then from that, they derive the conclusion, therefore, morality varies according to culture. So again, kind of the two primary arguments. One is a concern to provide a foundation for tolerance. If we just get rid of there being a wrong group, a bad group, right, then all cultures are equal. You can't look down on somebody for being from Papua New Guinea, because guess what? Their culture is equal to yours. You can't look down on somebody from being from wherever, Indonesia, because all cultures are equal. You can't look down on somebody for having a different favorite color or anything like that. And then also just this recognition that there is beliefs that vary across culture. So maybe let me ask this question at this point. What's the missing premise? How did we get from here, moral beliefs vary according to culture, to morality varies according to culture? What do you guys think? Can you see anything about that argument?
It seems like it's saying that our beliefs determine reality, define reality, which that's problematic, obviously.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So that's exactly what people call the dependency thesis, right? And that's just that moral principles derive their authority from culture. What's missing, right? Just because moral beliefs vary doesn't mean morality itself varies, right? Put anything else in there besides morality, right? Beliefs about the solar system vary according to culture. If you go back a long time ago, people thought, what was at the center of the solar system? The Earth, right? Beliefs about the solar system vary according to culture. Therefore, the solar system varies according to culture. What? Well, no, that doesn't work, right? And so the assumption is that moral principles derive their authority from culture. And without, like, I don't want to go down this road too terribly much, but one major problem with this diversity thesis is that it's what's called question begging. The thing that it's supposed to prove, it assumes, right? If you look at this dependency thesis, it's the same thing as our statement of moral relativism, just in different words, right? So this cannot possibly be an argument for moral relativism, because the only way to get it to work is to already assume that moral relativism works, right? That's kind of like saying, how do you know that your car is a good car? And you say, oh, well, because it's reliable, it gets good gas mileage, it's easy to fix. And you basically then just define what a good car is. And you say, yeah. But I mean, how do you know that it's reliable? How do you know that it gets good gas mileage? Oh, I see. because it's a good car. Right? Then you we're not getting anywhere here. Right? It's like, how do you know, though, that morality varies according to culture? Oh, well, because moral principles derive their authority from the culture. Isn't that what we started with? Right? We've just kind of gone in a circle here. What you were meant to prove, what you were meant to provide evidence for, is actually the thing that you assumed. So there's a couple things that we can do here. We can talk about this argument and some problems with the view of moral relativism, but then also we can kind of attack that diversity thesis. Is the diversity thesis actually true? I'm going to read to you a quote here from C.S. Lewis. And then I'll expand on that a little bit. So C.S. Lewis says, if a man will go into a library and spend a few days with an encyclopedia of religion and ethics, he will soon discover the massive unanimity of the practical reason in man. From the Babylonian hymn to Samos, from the laws of Manu, the Book of the Dead, the Analects, the Stoics, the Platonists, from Australian Aborigines and Redskins, we'll get back to that term later, he will collect the same triumphantly monotonous denunciations of oppression, murder, treachery, and falsehood, the same injunctions of kindness to the aged, the young, and the weak, of almsgiving and impartiality and honesty. In his book, The Abolition of Man, at the end of the book, Lewis provides this massive, very, very long list of all of these moral statements that all cultures across multiple cultures have all held to and believed. I think I said cultures twice in there. Moral beliefs that all cultures have held to and believed. But what about what Ruth Benedict said? What should we do with that? Well, first of all, one of the things that we should do is we should make a distinction between differences of moral beliefs and differences of factual beliefs. A lot of times when it looks like there's a difference in moral beliefs, it's actually a factual belief. Let me ask you guys this question. If AJ, the little girl that was in here running around a little bit ago, if she wanted to borrow my pocket knife, should I give it to her? So y'all think sharing is wrong. You're like, no, but you shouldn't do it with her, with that. Well, why, right? Well, because what's likely to happen if I give her a sharp knife? She's likely to hurt herself, and she's likely to hurt other people too, right? So there's an overriding moral principle. Don't do things that are likely to hurt other people. Do you know what the Dabuans believe? They believe that there are evil spirits that were always trying to enter in to objects, right? And if they could get into it, then they would cause all sorts of mischief and trouble, right? And so the only way that they couldn't do it was if somebody had possession of it. If somebody had possession of something, that was theirs, and the evil spirits couldn't enter into it. If you gave something to someone else, though, there's a period in which you didn't have possession of it and they didn't have possession of it. And evil spirits could enter in and could cause all sorts of trouble, right? So if you loan somebody their shovel, do you know what was likely to happen? That they would get hurt, right? That would break on them. The handle would snap and cut their hands, or they'd get terrible splinters or something like that, right? But they didn't believe that sharing was wrong, right? They had differences in moral and factual beliefs, not in moral beliefs. Don't do things that are likely to harm other people. That's what they believed, and that's what we believed. The differences was in factual issues. The same thing was true of the Quack-Udall people. And Ruth Benedict was not exactly straightforward and honest in her presentation of these things. They believed that if somebody died, then whoever was part of that family member could randomly kill somebody. And that was only because they thought this evil spirit of death woke up, and it was like, time to kill everybody. And then the only way that you could appease it, the only way that you could make it go away is if you killed another person, right? You couldn't choose who you were going to kill. That would be wrong. It had to be random. It had to basically be done by lots, right? It had to completely be random. Has anybody seen It's an old Charlton Heston movie called Gray Lady Down. No, y'all are letting me down. Y'all are supposed to be older than the college people I usually talk to. I was hoping somebody would know this.
Who's
Well-
Charlton Heston?
Moses. He's Moses. It's a submarine movie, and basically what happens is things go really bad in the submarine, and they're kind of stuck at the bottom of the ocean for a little while. And there's a part where a whole bunch of water is rushing into this one room, and so they've got to get everybody out, and they have to close the door. The only way to close the door is from the inside. So one guy stays behind and closes the door and shuts the door, and he drowns. Now, would you say, oh, I guess they believed it was okay to murder people? No, right? One person can sacrifice themselves for the good of other people. And in the movie, they didn't have time, all this water is rushing in. But if they did have time, they could maybe say, look, somebody's got to stay behind. Somebody's got to close it. We're going to draw straws. Whoever gets the shortest straw has to do it. Right? That's the same thing as what the quackoodles were in, right? And you can actually maybe even imagine where some of this happened, right? Like somebody has some horrible contagious disease, and so they die, and the people around them spread it to everybody else, and it just goes off and wreaks havoc, right? So if you can isolate that, if you can get rid of it, you can take care of the people that had contact with that person, then you can contain it, right? And so something like that then develops and grows, and they think, we're all going to die. We're on the submarine. It's taking on water, and somebody has to sacrifice themselves. And the people were almost always willing, right? I was like, I'm sorry, you got the short straw. It's okay. I understand. I'm willing to do this to save my wife, to save my children, to save my friends, right? The issue was a factual belief, not a moral belief, right? And so a lot of times when it looks like there's differences and moral beliefs, there really isn't. There's common underlying moral beliefs that there's agreement on, and there's non-moral beliefs that there's disagreement on, right? Like whether loaning somebody a shovel is likely to cause them harm or not. Everybody's in agreement. Well, if it is, you shouldn't do it. If your child wants to borrow your knife, you shouldn't let them do it because it's likely to cause harm. And so actually it seems like the diversity thesis is not true, but there is this tremendous amount of agreement. But moral relativism has some other problems with it. First of all, there's actually no reason to be tolerant under moral relativism. If you remember, I said that's one of the main reasons why people want to adopt relativism. Well, let me ask you this. Is being tolerant, is respecting other people something that everybody must do? Regardless of their culture? No. Right? What about Nazis? Known for tolerance? Known for respecting other people that aren't like them? That's what they're known for, right? Isn't that what they're remembered for? No. Can you say that they were wrong? If moral relativism is true, what did their culture decide? You're handicapped? You're not valuable. You're a Jew? You're not valuable. You're black? You're not valuable. Right? You're gypsy? You're not valuable. Have some mental or physical disability? You're not valuable. And they were horribly intolerant to those people. Right? Under moral relativism, though, that's what their culture decided. Whatever their culture decides, that's right. And so moral relativism actually does not provide a foundation for tolerance. Also, moral progress is impossible. We're going to play a game real quickly here, okay? The game works this way, is that you guys can say whatever number you want, okay? I will kind of pick from those numbers. We'll just pretend like a vote took place and we all agreed on it. I'm just going to pick one to save us a little bit of time, okay? And whatever number we choose, that's the correct number, okay? So somebody give me a number.
Well,
All right, I heard 7 first. We'll do that. All right, is that right? Is that 7?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Is that like half right? It's totally right, isn't it? All right, let's say, actually, we should make some adjustments to that. We should change the number. Somebody else give me another number.
3.
3. In front or in back? What do you guys think?
In
In fact, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Is that right? Yeah, yeah, that's right. Is it any more right than what it was before? No. Right? You see, we can't make a mistake if the correct answer is just whatever we choose, whatever we pick, right? No matter what number, it's always going to be right. It was right before, it's right now. It's not less right before and more right now. It's not less right now and more right before. It's whatever we pick. Okay. What about this? What is that?
It's not pie.
That's a mistake. Just do that. 3.1415. 9. That should be a 9. That's wrong. What if we go back and we say, oh, you know what? Sorry, guys, I kind of forgot that digit of pi for a minute. And we do this. Are we more right now? Yeah, we're more accurate, aren't we? We can get more or less accurate. Add a few more on there. We can make improvements. Why? Because there's an objective standard, right? Slavery used to be okay in the US. Now it's not okay. Was that moral progress?
Yeah.
Not under moral relativism, it's not,
Relative.
right? It's well, whatever's right and what's wrong is what our culture decided. We decided it was okay. So you know what? It was okay. Now we decided, you know what? Actually, not okay. So now it's not okay. No moral progress has been made, right? Whereas under this view, when there's an objective standard, you can make a mistake. You said you could treat people this way, and you were wrong. You cannot treat people that way. You said these people do not have value. You were wrong. You made a mistake, right? And you didn't just write an 8 down when you should have written a 9 down, right? The only way that moral progress can be possible is if there's an objective standard. And cultures can fail to live up to that standard, right? They can live up to it or they can fail to live up to it. If cultural relativism is true, there is no objective standard and there is no possibility for moral progress. One of the things then that comes out of that is that the minority is always wrong. You want to talk about terrible people under moral relativism? Martin Luther King Jr., horrible person. All the abolitionists, terrible, awful people. Corrie ten Boom, evil, awful, terrible person. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, horrible. Why? Because these people spoke against their culture. What's right and what's wrong? Under moral relativism, it's whatever the culture decides. So when you have a minority that speaks against what culture has decided and says you can't treat people this way, right? These little children, Mother Teresa in India, in Calcutta, these little children, these poor people, they have value and rights. And she speaks against the culture, she's by definition wrong. She's by definition evil under moral relativism. People that spoke against Hitler, that spoke against the Nazis, like Bonhoeffer, or people like Corrie ten Boom who hid Jews, right? They went against their culture. Evil, terrible, wrong, awful people. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, people who said, you can't treat us this way. This is wrong. All people have value and rights. People should be treated on the basis of their character, not on the basis of their skin color. Evil, terrible, wrong people on the basis of moral relativism, okay? Right? And I just want to say, if your moral theory makes Hitler a great guy, right? Because what did Hitler do? He went along with his culture. If Hitler and Goebbels are moral ideas, and Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King Jr. are examples of horrible, evil people, you have made a mistake somewhere, right? and it needs to be fixed, right? And so this is an additional problem. And again, it's interesting that a lot of people that support moral relativism really want to give a voice to minorities. They really want to be tolerant of people that disagree. And there is something that's, it's like, people that are on the outside do have the ability to see things differently and to provide valuable insight and correction that people on the inside are often oblivious to, right? And so we do want to recognize the importance of that, but you can't do it under moral relativism. Also, moral praise and blame becomes impossible across cultures. Actually, at the Nuremberg trials after World War II, this was exactly what the Nazis argued. They said in Germany, it was legal to kill Jews, so we killed them. You can't now judge us by the laws of your nation, right? No, we did what was legal. We didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, we tortured these people and experimented on them, but it was okay. That was part of what our rules were. Are you saying there's some sort of objective standard over and above what our culture decides that you can judge us on the basis of? And it was the lead prosecutor from the US that said, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I am saying there are objective, universal rules about how you should treat people. And you violated those and you were guilty for doing so. And if the laws of Germany were opposed to it, so much the worse for the laws of Germany. They were wrong. They were mistakes. They were errors, and you shouldn't have done it. And that was the argument. But it becomes impossible to say something like Nazi culture is wrong or bad, or the extermination of Jews is wrong or bad, right? Or the mutilation of women and children is wrong or bad, if those are things that are accepted by the culture. So I think these are major, massive problems with relativism. And again, they tend to undercut the things that people often want to value and adopt in taking on moral relativism in the first place. But let me talk about another problem. What exactly is a culture anyways? Let's say that it's like, I don't know, 1929, you're in Germany, right? And the Nazis are kind of coming to power, and you're like, should I hate Jewish people or should I not hate Jewish people? Let's say that you're a good, cultural relativist, right? And so you say, well, Germany as a whole, Nazis hate Jews. I guess that's the right thing for me to do. And then you go, oh, but you know what? In my town, most of the people were against the Nazis. Maybe my culture is my town. And so I guess I should be against the Nazis. Oh, but you know what? In my Rotary Club, where I'm a member, most of the people were for the Nazis. Maybe that's my culture, because I'm part of that Rotary Club. Oh, but you know what? The majority of the people in my family, they were against the Nazis. Maybe I should be against the Nazis too. You see, the problem is that you can't define culture, what culture is, right? Are we Americans? Are we Virginians, right? Sometimes states and nations vote differently on things, like on elections. Well, which one should we identify with? The state or the nation? You know what? How much of you would say, yes, I'm a Virginian versus, oh, I'm a Free Methodist or something, right? Or I'm a Christian. Well, maybe that's our culture, right? We're not just Free Methodists, we're Waynesboro Free Methodists. Why can't us Waynesboro Free Methodists make our own culture and decide for ourselves what's right and what's wrong? Why can't we establish our own culture? Actually, why can't we? Just us in a room. Forget the rest of the Waynesboro Free Methodists. Us, right here. You guys, let's write right now our decision for what's right and for what's wrong. Why can't we do that? Why can't we be our own culture? And maybe I don't like y'all's.
Even with just how many we have here, we wouldn't come up with this.
Yeah.
We'd come up with different.
Well, you know what? That's a good point, Dave. I think I will make my own culture. I will do it. Just me. I'm my own culture. Why can't I do that? That's what's called subjectivism. Subjectivism basically is the view that it's not dependent on the culture that makes things right or wrong. It's dependent on the individual. Each individual gets to decide for themselves what's right or what's wrong. And it doesn't seem to be any way to stop relativism from slipping into subjectivism. And if you look at what our society done, that's exactly what it's done. It's moved from cultural relativism into subjectivism. So what's the problems with subjectivism? Well, for one, all of these problems repeat themselves, right? There's no reason for me to be tolerant to other people if I don't choose to be tolerant, right? There's no way for me to make moral progress if whatever I decide is right and wrong for myself is what's right and what's wrong. There's no way for anybody to provide correction for me. I don't have to listen to any person. And moral praise and blame becomes impossible across cultures and across people, right? And actually, there was a famous moral subjectivist who argued for this view. Does anybody know who that is?
Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy. Yeah, that is Ted Bundy. And when he was in court, that was exactly what he argued. This is what he said. He said, believe it or not, I figured out what the Chief Justice couldn't figure out for himself, that if the rationality of one value judgment was 0, multiplying it by millions would not make it one whit more rational. Let me pause there for a second. What's he talking about multiplying by 0? If there is no right and wrong answer, if there is no objective value, do you know what your view is worth? Nothing, right? If you get 1 million people together to make up a culture, do you know what 1 million times 0 is? 0. It's still 0. Doesn't matter how many people you get together, you're not going to get morality out of that, right? If there is no objective moral value, that's what he's saying. And he says, nor is there any reason to obey the law for anyone like myself who has the boldness and daring, the strength of character to throw off its shackles. Why should I be willing to sacrifice my pleasure for the one than the other? What's he talking about here? Well, there's a long section that he goes on that I cut out. And basically what he says in that is he says, you like eating ham sandwiches. So do you know what you do? You kill pigs and you eat ham sandwiches. You know what I like doing? I like killing and raping people. So do you know what I do? I kill and I rape people because I like doing that. You do what you like to do. I do what I like to do. You say it's okay for animals. Why isn't it okay for people? Huh? You decided that you're going to act that way. Why can't I decide to act this way? What are you going to appeal to? Surely you would not in this age of scientific enlightenment declare that God or nature has marked some pleasures as moral or good and others as immoral or bad. That's your only option. That's your only option. It's not dependent on the person. It's not dependent on the culture, right? There are objective moral values that are good, regardless of what anybody thinks about it, right? And there's a big problem with removing God from ethics, is this is exactly what you wind up with. And there's several people that have pointed this out, is that really cultural relativism, subjectivism, they just don't work. They're entirely inconsistent. That's kind of part of what Ted Bundy is getting at here, right? Is you can't say that there's something that's right or wrong. Each person can just do whatever they want to. And the view that there is no right and wrong is what's called nihilism. So I have up here nihilism, a much more reasonable theory. It's at least consistent, right? The view is that life is meaningless and valueless. There is no right, there is no wrong, there is no good, there is no bad. There's a poem by a guy, Stephen Crane. It's called A Man Said to the Universe, and it kind of states this position nicely. The poem says, a man said to the universe, sir, I exist. However, replied the universe, that fact has not created in me a sense of obligation. You are owed nothing. You are not owed respect. You are not owed dignity. You have zero value. You have zero worth. It does not matter. You will die and you will go the same way as everybody else. When I've talked to this to students at Liberty, it's a bunch of like college age people. And one of the things that I'll sometimes do is I'll ask them, I'll say, you have 2 parents. Everybody here has 2 parents, okay? And then you have 4 grandparents. And then you have 8 great-grandparents, okay? So your great-grandparents, if they don't exist, your grandparents don't exist, your parents don't exist, you don't exist. You do not exist without these people. We're talking about your grandparents' parents or your parents' grandparents. You know your parents. You know your grandparents. This isn't that far removed from you. How many of you can name first, middle, and last for all 8 of your great grandparents? I've never had anybody to be able to do it. Like, you don't exist without these people, and you don't even know who they are anymore.
Mm.
And you know what's going to happen in about 80 years? About 80 years, there's going to be some other weird guy that's up here talking to a bunch of college-age students. And you know what he's going to say? He's going to talk to your great-grandchildren. And he's going to say, you have 2 parents and 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents. Can anybody name your great-grandparents' names? And nobody's going to be able to do it. Your great-grandchildren will not remember your name. You are unimportant and you have no value and meaning. And somehow that always kills the mood in class for somebody, right? But that's the view here, right? You know, you have no worth, you have no meaning, you have no value. There's a famous atheist philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, and he wrote a book, and in it he talked about this crazy guy who runs out into the middle of the street and he starts screaming about how God is dead, God is dead. And so he says, this is what the crazy guy says. He says, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him, yet his shadow still looms. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet known has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Shall we have to invent to give ourselves the illusion of meaning and value and purpose? And what Nietzsche is getting at here is if you get rid of God, you get rid of morals, you get rid of value, you get rid of goodness. There is no other way to provide a foundation for it. And what we should do is what's called a Morean shift. There was a British philosopher, his name was G.E. Moore. And he was talking about another philosopher's views. And he said, if that philosopher is correct, I don't know this pencil exists. And he says, I know this pencil exists, therefore that guy's wrong, right? And so what do? We say, you know what? Children have value. You know what? You have value. You have worth. You have dignity. There is right and there is wrong. So you know what? God exists. And that, in short, is the moral argument. If there is no God, there is no morality. But there is morality, so there must be a God, right? That's how that works here. And so the picture, we actually talked about this a while back, about like God created the world to be a certain way. He set up rules for it. He set up rules for gravity. He set up rules for how atoms works. And you know what? He set up rules for how people work. He designed them to work a certain way. He designed it so that good, healthy people love their children. And they love each other. And they show love and kindness and patience to each other. That's how God set the world up to work. And if you go against that, you go against the design plans. And so there are these objective moral truths. There are things that you have an obligation to do. And if you get it wrong, you're going to have problems. If you do a mathematical equation off of, when this was an 8, it's going to be wrong. There's going to be a mistake in it, right? And in a sense, that's what all sin is going against that design plan, that operation, that the way that God designed the universe to run and to work. And we go against that and trouble ensues because of that. And I actually want to kind of revisit the dependency thesis here, because I want to say something about objective moral values and how that actually can fit in with the dependency thesis. So let's look at that again real quick. If you remember, the dependency thesis was just that moral principles derive their authority from the culture. There's actually 2 different versions of that. One is the strong version. That's true for all moral principles, right? For whether you should murder people or not murder people, or whether you should torture children or not torture children. That's true for all moral principles. That is what moral relativism has to hold to. That is what is very problematic. But there's a weaker version of it. And that is that the above is true for some, but not all moral principles. And objectivists can affirm the weak version. They can allow that the application of fundamental moral principles may vary. But nevertheless, the less foundational moral principles may vary, while fundamental ones do not, right? Yeah, I think I said that right. So the way that we apply an objective moral principle, that can vary, but the foundational part does not vary. Let me give some examples of that. Like, we should not tempt other people, right? We should not tempt other people to have bad thoughts. And that's part of the reasons that we have dress codes, right? If I didn't wear anything, it would, I don't know if it would tempt you to have bad thoughts, but maybe repulsive thoughts or something, right? Right, but maybe it'll work better if there was a lady that was up here. That would probably work better. Right, but things about dress codes. Don't dress provocatively. Don't dress in a way that's going to tempt people to have bad thoughts. That's essentially what you're saying. Well, what's provocative? Is a woman wearing pants provocative? Well, at one point it was. Can you show your ankles? Is that provocative? Have you noticed that dress codes get there's less and less expected for people to wear the closer you get to the equator? Well, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It's a little hotter there, right? What's provocative for somebody to wear up in a northern climate, maybe 500 years ago, might be very different than what's okay to wear around the equator right now. Right? There can be differences of applications, right? There can be differences of applications about things like speed limits, right? You have an obligation to obey the rules of the road. Whether you drive on the right or the left, well, cultures can determine that, right? How fast are you allowed to drive? Well, cultures can have something to say about that because there's other things that are involved. How fast can your car stop? That's a very important factor, right? In terms of how fast can you drive, is how fast can your car stop? As brakes get better, as people are able to stop more quickly, guess what? You can drive faster more safely, right? But the idea of don't do things that are likely to cause harm to other people, that does not change. What's likely to cause harm to other people, that changes. What's likely to tempt other people, that changes. And so the application of those fundamental principles, those can change. I'd mentioned that I'd come back to that term, Lewis, about saying redskins. Probably most of us would not use that term now to refer to Native Americans, right? And of course, there's a big stink about like the football team and all of that stuff. I don't know where that's at, but you get the point, right? Sometimes words change in terms of whether they're offensive. Do not denigrate other people. Do not refer to them derogatively. Do not be unkind to them. Those are things that hold true. Whether a term is derogative or not, well, that changes, right? Whether you can do certain symbols with your hand, that changes across cultures. Sometimes this is okay. Other times you're a very, very bad person, and I'm saying mean things about you, right? So there are certain things that we can do with our hands. We can hold up certain fingers, and there are certain fingers we shouldn't hold up, right? Why is that? Well, because it's not because like some sort of moral principle is varying, right? No, don't do things to offend other people. Don't do things to purposefully attack other people, right? And cultures and societies, people say, well, this is what happens if you hold up this finger. This is what happens if you hold up these fingers. This is what happens if you hold up this other one, right? So don't do that one. Don't sit so that you can show other people the soles of your shoes. That's very disrespectful in some cultures. I think I have time for this
Can I
story. Yeah.
Well, just when you're doing that, it's like if you want to adhere to the weak version, someone has to define fundamental.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing's fundamental. I don't see how there's a weak version at all because fundamental is still totally you know, what's the word, you can move nobody's gonna agree on an objective fundamental.
Yeah, so I think so that's a very good.
In other words, the weak people that would say, well, this is the weak version, yeah, okay. If the strong version, yeah, it doesn't work, but the weak version does. Well, the weak version can't work because it's based on the strong version, which what's fundamental? So it just falls apart, in my opinion.
Yeah, it seems to me that it works this way. One thing that's going to separate them is that the weaker version, if you hold to some sort of objective values, you're saying there are objective values. That is true regardless of what people think. And you know what? People can make mistakes about what's fundamental and what's not fundamental. That just means those people are wrong, right? They think that something is fundamental and it's really not. Or they think that something is, am I saying it the other way? They think that something's not fundamental and it is. I say it both ways. Anyways, you get the point, right?
But where's fundamental come from?
So I think so that's a good question. And there's a couple things that we could say. One is, where do they come from in a ontological standpoint? In other words, how is it that they exist? That answer is God. That's the answer,
Yeah,
is that they
well,
come from him.
That's what I'm saying.
So what has God says that you have to do? You know what? God didn't say everybody has to be a doctor. But God did say everybody has to treat other people with respect. God did say love your neighbor as yourself. God did say do not lie, do not murder, do not steal, do not cheat, right? Those are the things that you have to do, and everybody has to do them. So there's a way of doing that. And then there's a question of like, well, how do we know them? Right? So how is it that they exist, and how is it that we know them? Those are two different questions. And it does seem to me like you can hold the weak version and say they do exist in this objective standpoint. They are real, but people can make incorrect decisions about them, right? And I do think that we need some way of saying there are fundamental moral principles that do not vary, and there's the application of moral principles that can vary, right? So the amount of freedom that people had, say, in World War II when London was being bombed was far less than what it was after the war was over, right? It was like, you have to have your lights off because it will kill you and it will kill your neighbors. It is likely to cause harm to other people if you have your lights on, and German planes know where to drop bombs, right? And so it seems like there does need to be room for the application of stuff. And you have an obligation to do those sorts of things. When the government passes a law and it says, you got to have these curtains, you got to have your lights turned off, you got to do this. Guess what? You are wrong if you don't do it. You are wrong if you drive 120 through a school zone, right? You're wrong for doing that. And, but you're not wrong for doing that in Germany on the Autobahn. Or whatever, that there is room for this application that's to differ. So I don't know. Maybe that's
well, the only thing I would say, and I'll shut up, is that the culture, the moral principles derive from their authority from the culture.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it seems like when you have this idea of fundamental moral principles, they come from a culture that's been acted on by the truth of God. In other words, in the US, there's certain things that you would that people that aren't Christians that have no idea what the Bible says would consider right and wrong simply because the culture has adopted biblical truth to those things. And that's what we see the erosion of. But when you go to this whole thing about the authority from the culture only, if that's only, then I don't see how you could come with a fundamental moral principle.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. Maybe what I need to do is reword this part, is what the weak version is say something like the weak version of the dependency thesis is, forget all of this up here, is that the application of some, but not all moral principles is
it's like a
relative to the culture.
Anyhow, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to.
No, that's okay. I think I still have time for this story. I'm going to tell it mainly because I think it's funny. There was a big missionary conference that was taking place in England, And so there was a bunch of Americans that were flying over from the US to England. And so this one group of missionaries flew over, and they got picked up by some local Christians that were also like kind of missionaries and stuff, and that were British. And we'll just say the people that got picked up, the Americans, were Smith. And the Smiths were like, hey, did the Jones get here already? And the one British guy's like, and Smith is like, what's up with that guy? Well, the guy that was driving is just laughing hysterically. He goes, what's up with him and the Joneses? The guy's like, So the guy said, he's like, tell him what happened. Tell him what happened. And they're like, so the guy says, that Mrs. Jones has the worst mouth I have ever heard on anybody. She dropped the F-bomb multiple times on the way back from the airport. And the Smith guy is like, I know Mrs. Jones. She doesn't say that. She doesn't talk like, what's going on? And the driver's just laughing. And he tells the British guy, he says, tell him what she said. Say the F word. The guy's like, I am not saying that. I am not, And it's like, she knows what she said. And so finally it comes out, she had said Fanny. That is a horribly offensive term in British. And Mrs. Jones, if I have that right, was just from the South. And she was saying like, oh, my Fanny, that's so hot. And the guy's like, oh, like this woman, she curses like a sailor, saying Fanny. And, right. And so, we don't use words that are meant to hurt other people. We don't use words that are meant to offend other people. But whether a word is offensive or likely to cause harm is socially determined, right? And so we have things like respect other people. That's something that we have to do. All people are created in the image of God, and so we have to do that. But carrying that out, it necessarily entails that we do it in a society of people. Do we stand up when a woman enters the room? Is that necessary for us to show her respect? Do we pull her chair out for her? Do we hold the door for her? Right? Some of those social things are changing, aren't they? But it doesn't change the fact that we owe women respect. That doesn't change, right? And so the arrangement of the society can influence how things like benevolence and kindness and respect towards other people is carried out. And lastly, I want to make a distinction between what's called act and judgment tolerance. Act tolerance concerns how we treat other people, okay? We have to treat other people as having dignity and values and rights. And objective moral principles can provide a foundation for that. Judgment tolerance concerns how we treat not people, but ideas, right? And there's a big difference between those two. The original idea of tolerance was that you showed a person respect, you showed them honor, you treated them kindly, even though they differed with you. That was the idea of tolerance, right? And we need to not confuse these. And a lot of times in our culture, that is exactly what we do. You're not the same political party as me, I treat you poorly. Because I don't like your ideas, I don't like you, right? Or if I don't like you, I don't like your ideas. Or, well, I should treat this person with kindness and respect. Well, I guess they're right about whatever they think then. No, that's not how that works, right? We have to keep those things separate, right? People that differ with us, people that live alternative lifestyles, people that are homosexual, they are created in the image of God, and we are to treat them with dignity and respect. We are to treat them with love and with kindness. But that does not mean that we have to agree with their ideas on everything. Right. And so a huge part of the problem with intolerance that relativists were legitimately and rightly concerned about really came down to a confusion of these things. Right. And again, the only way that we can provide a foundation for this kind of tolerance is through objective values. Right. And then we can have a discussion about ideas. Right. And so we need to have this sort of constant, continual distinction, am I saying this right? We need to constantly and continually have this distinction before us, that people and their ideas are to be treated differently, right? That regardless of how crummy of an idea they have, they are to be treated with dignity and respect. You know what? Jesus loved Hitler. You know, Jesus died for Hitler. You know, Jesus cared about him. You know, if he was to be in this room, we are to treat him with dignity and respect as a loved child of God. That does not mean we need to adopt his policies. It does not mean that we should not ruthlessly attack those and point out the problems with them, right? So we have to keep those separate.
That's a big difference today, because I think today the word tolerance is intended to include acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I tolerate your wrong thoughts, that's not enough. I've
Yeah.
got to accept and embrace your wrong thoughts. And that's where I think that word tolerance has gotten misused. And,
Yeah.
And I think your distinction between ideas and people is so important, because if you talk about we tolerate people, that's not very loving.
Mhm.
Right? That doesn't value them. We can tolerate the ideas, but we love them.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of the, I don't want to get too off track here, but it's one of the problems with like identity politics and stuff.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with somebody that was gay, and one of the things that I really tried to emphasize was like, your identity is not in being gay. You are a human. That is what you are. You're not a gay. A gay is not a thing. You are a human. You are a person. And as such, you have rights, you have value, you have importance. And I will respect those things, right? And then there are things that you do. There are loves that you have. There are attractions that you have. There's actions that you take. But those are not who you fundamentally are, right? You're not fundamentally an electrician. You're not fundamentally an engineer. You're not fundamentally this. You're fundamentally a human. That's what you are, right? And you have values and rights based off of those. And then the other things we can talk about, right? And so it really is, there's, in identity politics, there's often a conflation of those things. No, I am this. And so if you don't accept this idea, then you don't accept me. And they're just like smudging this line here and blurring it, right? And you have to work to try and get those clear. And, you know, Christians have not always done the best with that either.
Christian is our mission. Christian is our mission.
Yeah. All right, I got just a couple things I want to try and go through real quickly, and then I'll be good. So this is really, I want to now kind of tie what we've been saying back to the humanities. And I want to say, you know, there's a deep connection between goodness, between morality, and even things like beauty and stuff. So first of all, just as kind of a point of fact, like consider our language, right? When we tell somebody don't be ugly, we don't mean like go get plastic surgery, you know, or like you should fix that nose or something like that. That's not what we say at all, right? We're saying don't be a bad person, but we often use language of beauty and language of goodness synonymously or interchangeably. We use it in both contexts. There's a deep connection between these things. And just like there's vast agreement on moral issues, there's vast agreement on beauty. And that's something that's really pushed back against. But let me give a couple examples of this. How many people do you know that are like, oh, that's a terrible painting, completely worthless, horribly drawn, awful, not valuable? No. There is massive consistency across the arts as to who are the great painters, who are the great pieces of artwork, right? What's great art? What's really beautiful? Exactly how those are structured, you know, do we like Michelangelo or do we like Leonardo? Yes, there's differences there. Is Michelangelo a master? Not really difference there, right? Is Leonardo da Vinci one of the great masters? Not really disagreement there. Right? Massive agreement on those sorts of things. That's true also for music. How many people are like Beethoven? That guy couldn't even write a song to save his life. You know, maybe you can say, you know what? I don't know enough about music to enjoy it. I don't enjoy it. I don't appreciate it, but it's only because I don't know enough about music. He was a master. There's tremendous amounts of agreement on things like whether Mozart was a gifted musician or not, or whether Beethoven was a gifted musician or not. There's far more agreement on those things than there is disagreement on those things. Or how many like people do you know? Does anyone know who that is?
Alfred Hitchcock.
Alfred Hitchcock, yeah. I'm like, oh, that guy couldn't direct. That guy couldn't make a movie. He had no clue what he was doing. No, there's massive agreement in terms of who the great directors are, even in films and stuff. Maybe you don't care for it. Maybe you say, oh, I have trouble valuing it because of this, because of that. But there's a tremendous amount of agreement that these things are great or valuable. How many people do you know that are like, oh, sunsets, sunrises, oh, those things are disgusting. They're so ugly. I hate them. Mountains, ugh. No, nobody. There's a tremendous amount of agreement that the world is beautiful, that mountains are beautiful. Do we want to go to the mountains or do we want to go to the beach? Maybe we have disagreements there. Yes. But that the beach is wonderful and beautiful? Yeah. That the mountains are wonderful and beautiful? Yeah. That sunsets and sunrises are wonderful and beautiful? Yeah. There's a massive, massive amount of agreement. And what people do is they take this huge area of agreement. This is all the stuff that people agree on. And then they look at these little fringe issues where there's disagreement. And then they say, see, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And it's like, have you looked at this? You know, again, would you rather listen to Mozart or Beethoven? Yeah, there could be disagreements there, right? There could be disagreements about what their favorite color is. The colors are beautiful. Not really disagreements about that, right? The colors are wonderful. The blind people are missing something good and valuable. Nobody disagrees about that, right? Massive agreement, superficial levels of disagreement. So there's actually a considerable amount of agreement over beauty. Also consider the connection between the good and the beautiful, the bad and the ugly. Can the evil be beautiful? How many of you ladies are like, that Hitler? Woo! He's a good guy. How many of you guys are like, I'm thinking about just trimming? Just a little bit. Funny story about Hitler. His sister told this story. Was that, he fought in World War I and his mustache would stick out of his gas mask. He had this big, long mustache. And somebody in the family said, hey, Doc, you should really trim that thing. And so he went into the bathroom and he came out and he just had that small thing. And his sister said, I quote, like most things in life, he took it just a little too far, for which he should have won understatement of the century. Right? But once we see that something is evil or terrible, right, we don't see it as beautiful, right? There's a deep connection between those sorts of things. Is there moral goodness that is not beautiful, right? How many of you know somebody that maybe, attraction, unfortunately, is so often connected to sex, right? But how many of you know somebody that is just a good person that you are deeply attracted to? And like, I want to spend time with that person. I want to be around that person. They are wonderful. That's a statement about beauty, right? That they're desirable, that there's something worthy of recognition and praise, right? And so then, we have questions. This is what we'll be talking about next week, really. And so then what about stories in art, or teachings which depict or teach the inversion of this, that teach the good as dumb, as ugly, or that teach the evil as beautiful or attractive, right? It means that there's problems with that. So we'll talk more about that. But also, if you watch movies or if you look at art, or you listen to song lyrics or poems, or you look at books or anything, there's almost always going to be a depiction of a value judgment. Right? If you watch an MTV music video, do they still play music videos? Anyways, if they do, right? If you watch a music video, you will see and hear a depiction of who is a good person and who is well off. The person with the fast car. It's the person with the big house. It's the person that's surrounded by money and women. That's who's a good person. That's who is well off, right? There's a deep connection between these sorts of things. If you watch a film, you'll see an ethical theory that's being depicted. And poor Abby, one of the things that I often do when I watch movies and stuff, and there's a bad guy on the screen, I'm like, consequentialist, right? And like you can see, like almost all bad guys are consequentialists. Almost all good guys are people that are like, there's a right and there's a wrong, and I'm going to do the right. If I die, I die. People hate me, they hate me, but I will stick to what is right. I will stick to what is good. That's true across all movies. And that goes directly against moral relativism and stuff. But it's like, it's almost impossible to make a movie in which the good person is like, I will only do right when it's convenient for me. Right? When was the last time that you saw that? When was the last time that you saw a bad guy that was like, no, this is good, we're doing it, period. It's not about what I want, it's not about what other people want. We're going to stick to these values and hold to them. That's never the moral outlook of the bad guy, right? And so there's this, people call it the trinity of values, which is goodness, beauty, and truth. Those things are all intimately linked to each other. And it's very interesting to think of all of those in perfection in God, right? The source of everything that exists, ultimate truth, ultimate beauty, everything that you love, everything that you're attracted to, everything that you find valuable, it finds its root in God. And God is the source of goodness himself. He makes a good world and he tells us how to live in it well, right? And that's where morality comes from. So we'll talk about the arts and some more on this next time. And sorry I ran over a little bit.